this community, I don't think of it as a sleeping giant. I'll be very frank with you, Katrina. It's a seductor. It'll seduce you if you just are open to the notion that you can't shorthand any community. You can't shorthand Bettendorf. You can't shorthand Rock Island. If you take the time to meet some of these neighbors, to do some things, and that's what I'm saying, because it's also got the small town feel, you don't have to drive 2 hours to have an entirely different experience. I got friends in the suburbs who will do that all the time and not even think about it. I can go to an entirely different cosmos that is 8 minutes away from my front door. And it's yeah, if you give this community half a chance, it will win you over.
Where do you find a family of communities connected by the storied Mississippi River, where young explorers and dreamers, investors and entrepreneurs thrive? Where can you connect with real people living and creating in a place that's as genuine as it is quirky? QC, that's where.
I'm Katrina, your host from Visit Quad Cities, and this episode is a bit of a look behind the scenes of tourism and placemaking and destination attraction. So to help us take a look at all of that is Ben Leischner, chairman of the Visit Quad Cities board, and Kai Swanson, immediate past chairman. So, hey, I'm just going to throw it to you guys, and we'll just dive into what you do on the board and what you do kind of in the community. So Kai, you want to take us off first?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'll let Kai go as the senior executive here.
Yeah. I was going to let Ben go because then I said, well, that's what I did last year. No, for Visit Quad Cities, it has a very representative governing body, which helps to, I think, leverage the reach of the organization through elected officials and leaders in all sorts of variety of pursuits. But also to be a sounding board for the professional team, not to tell them what to do, but to make sure that if something's keeping them up at night, it's the right thing and not the wrong thing. And so in the role of past chair, I basically get to sit around and critique everything Ben does. Ben, take it away.
Yes, and actually I appreciate Kai's critiques because I've learned a lot from him, especially traveling this last week, getting a chance to represent the Quad Cities. But as chairman of Visit Quad Cities, I've taken my lead from Kai, who took his lead from Mo before him, and I think we all work to build on the work done by the cadre of leadership prior. So we develop initiatives collaboratively as a board, and those initiatives are always changing. And I think part of what we do is we read the tea leaves a little bit within the community, but also what tourism is doing nationally. Both Kai and myself, a lot of our action was spurred on through the response to COVID and the pandemic and the impact on tourism. So certainly that has shaped our response. And to echo Kai, I think we have a very diverse board when it comes to community representation, which certainly makes us stronger as an organization, but also as a kind of policy oversight body for Dave and the staff at Visit Quad Cities, which any chance I get, I love to brag about Visit Quad City staff as well as Dave, because the more involved I get with the board and my role as a community advocate with Visit Quad Cities, the more I am impressed with the work they do. For such a lean, smaller organization, they are doing great things.
Well, that kind of makes me wonder, what is the biggest challenge, what has been the biggest challenge as a board member? Because from a staff member looking in, I see, the executive meetings and how, it is a very diverse group with different experiences pulling from different areas of the community. So you all seem to really bounce well off each other and work together to act as supervisors and leaders. But what are some of the big challenges that come with being a board member?
I went first last time, Ben. That's all yours.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And so, I think one of the strengths can be our weaknesses. It's the diversity of having a large board. And because the Quad Cities is not a single city, it is the Quad Cities, and it's an aggregate of multiple smaller communities. Every community or every board member has specific interests for their community, whether they're a mayor, an elected official, or representing a certain sector of industry. I'm representing the airport in many ways and its conduit to tourism and travel. And me personally, I'm not a political person, but recognizing that our board, even though we're there as a board of volunteers, we live in a political environment. So things that I may see as being politically agnostic, and that's where, again, I will say what makes us strong as a board, I look to Kai, I look to some of these other elected leaders to say, hey, there's a nuance here that, if you haven't served in office, you may not pick up on it, but think of it this way. So having that relationship to where we can talk behind the scenes to try to better the organization becomes a strength. And I think it starts off, if we weren't so good at that, that would certainly be an impediment to progress.
I would simply add, Katrina, I mean, I do appreciate your question. The challenges of governance here are pretty generic. I wouldn't say it's anything specific to Visit Quad Cities, but any kind of governance structure, the first challenge is getting the board to fly at the appropriate altitude. You want them to be looking at the landscape in sort of a broad brush way, but not spending their time in the weeds at such a low altitude that they're saying, hey, I think this staffer needs to be doing more of that, and you need to, that sort of thing. So flying at the appropriate altitude is something that we all have to be thinking about at every board meeting. The other is, and I think Ben did a good job alluding to this, is when you are a board member, regardless of the organization, but especially a not-for-profit and a volunteer community-based board like this, you absolutely need to bring your whole self. So for me, my day job is in higher education, and yes, I do some stuff in local government. I bring all of that with me to the table. But you can't just bring your whole self. You also have to bring your best self. And as Ben indicated, it's a principle of governance that it's called the duty of loyalty. And when we're sitting around that table, regardless of what our parochial interests are, doesn't matter what political entity I represent or geographic entity or anything like that, my key concern is the well-being of Visit Quad Cities in its capacity to fulfill its mission. If I don't like its mission, I either shouldn't be on the board or I should be advocating to alter that mission through parliamentary processes. But considering that's not a big part of our regular meetings, when I'm there, I have to have my Visit Quad Cities board hat on and on tightly, if that makes any sense.
Being on the board is not something to be taken lightly, because your decisions, as volunteers, your decisions and your guidance can be extremely impactful, because we are talking about a rather large region that, we're trying to be the captain of the ship for, if you will. So, I mean, time constraints. I mean, I think this might be a good time to kind of look at what you are in the community and, what takes up your time and what makes you motivated to want to spend ample time being on this board and leading this direction.
Ben, I'll take a first swing at this one. For me, that's a pretty easy one. I grew up here. I make no bones about the fact that I love this community. And I chose my grandparents very, very well because they did a good job modeling for me what community engagement is like, and they passed that on through their children, my parents. And it's just not acceptable to sit around and say what you don't like about a place. You got to get off the bench and you got to get out on the field or the court, as you may. I got to remember, Ben, you got to get on the airstrip and behind that left seat. There you go. And you need to be involved and be engaged. And so I don't really count hours of stuff, but yeah, I do some things in the community, both with the Rock Island County Board, the Rock Island County Forest Preserve Commission, which oversees some of our beautiful green spaces, wild spaces around here. My work in higher education translates. Part of that portfolio is working with the community at Augustana College, obviously proud to be in Rock Island and equally proud to be in Quad Cities and Western Illinois, Eastern Iowa. So I don't see clear delineations, because what I might gain from a conversation with a guy like Ben is going to inform my job at work. So I don't do a really precise job of accounting along those lines, but it does. I mean, it's sure better than sitting around watching streaming video all the time, which some people that might be fine with, but the folks that are around that board table, I gain a lot of inspiration from, because they really want to get out and they want to make this a better place.
Yeah, and to further that, I'll start off by recognizing that both Kai and I myself are very blessed to be in a position to where we have the time and capacity to give back to our communities. And I have a lot of really smart friends, coworkers, colleagues that maybe aren't in the right position in their career or the right time in their career right now to have that capacity. So I think a recognition of that is we're very fortunate to be able to have the space to really give back to our communities. I'm a bit of a different story. While I consider Kai kind of Mr. Quad Cities, where he's got this history there and such a fantastic tour guide for the community, I'm a transplant. When I came to the Quad Cities, I had never heard of it. I thought of it as a 5-year stint. I can do anything for 5 years in the furtherance of my career for something that's better for my family. What I absolutely did not expect or anticipate was to fall in love with the community. There was a period of time where it was fake it till you make it. I'm going to say great things because this is now home. But a strange thing happened where you come to Quad Cities and it's kind of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, where it's you think you know what's right, but it's some things are too big, some things are too small. Quad Cities is just right. And so it's something where it's large enough to have everything you truly need, but it's small enough to still feel like home and be community, where you can go out to dinner and, oh, there's Bob and Sally, let's go say hi. And so there is this sense of community that if you get any larger than the Quad Cities, I think that starts to fade to a degree. So it is very much just, it's the right size and right feel. It's a great place to raise a family. And I recognize that wasn't right away. It took a couple of years, but after I got to that point, and when Dave approached me to see if I would be interested in serving on the board, I had a no board position policy at first. I'm like, I've got too much going on. There's too many other things to focus on. But certainly this is the type of organization, especially the synergy with my day job as executive director at the airport. It's too important not to get involved when I have the capacity. I'm also very fortunate. I have a board of commissioners that are very supportive with my role as far as community engagement goes. And they see the value of the airport playing a prominent role in furthering the community, not just as the airport and adding air service, but as a contributing member of our community.
Then I want to pull something that you said after Destination QC, which for those listening who aren't familiar, is Visit Quad Cities annual event where we kind of wrap up the progress, obstacles, milestones, and present it to anyone who wants to come and sit in a room and listen and enjoy and network. But we talked after that, Ben, and you said to me that you've lived a lot of places, you've lived in every corner of this country, and the grass isn't always greener. And you found here, like you just said, is a great place to, settle in, raise a family, explore. And I've always said I'm in the same kind of situation. I'm a transplant as well. Been here for about 10 years. So I've lived like all of my adult life here so far. But I've always felt the Quad Cities has that small town feel with big city amenities. I've said that over and over. That's like the best way I can describe what it is. And then back to Destination QC that night, Dave, our president and CEO, Dave Harrell, he said in his presentation that the Quad Cities is like a sleeping giant. And I think that resonated with a lot of people. I'd love to hear your perspective on what that means to you guys.
Yeah, so I think I've taken a page from Dave's book several times where I talk about the Quad Cities where, and not that I chastise some community leaders, we're like, hey, now you're thinking like a community of 20,000. You're thinking like a community of 43,000. We need to think like a community of almost 500,000 people. And if you look at the CSA of the Quad Cities, I think we're like the 91st largest CSA in the United States. We're much larger than we give ourselves credit for. And a lot of the criticism I hear from people within the community, me personally, comes from people that haven't experienced what's on the other side of the fence. They haven't gone to large city living. They haven't spent significant amounts of time in other communities. And yeah, lots of times it does look, hey, gosh, it'd be really nice to have that daily. Same, I have the conversation with family members regularly, like Pacific Northwest coming from Seattle, there's mountains and there's hiking and we could hike whenever we want. It's like, well, Yeah, except for the 67% of the time when it's a downpour and raining, it's not as pleasant hiking in the rain. So that leaves you 30% of the time, but then you're busy 20% of that. And so it always looks better, but if you take in the whole picture, it's not always that way. So I think if we can think as a community of nearly 500,000 people, and we can get going all to build momentum going all in the same direction versus going kind of slightly different trajectories that may have a net positive gain in a direction, which is where we've been. If we could get our vectors all in the same direction, I'm convinced we could certainly do great things as a community.
I could listen to Ben talk all day, and I love it when I hear people who didn't grow up here who actually have taken the time to catch sight of the magic, because part of the reason it is magic is it defies the casual observer. And that's why people will come here, and I get it. They can be here for some time and think it's not the place for them. But I especially appreciate when people are open to having their assumptions questioned. I think often about the fact that one of our biggest challenges in this community is assumptions that people make, shorthand to their thinking. Well, I'm not going to go to that community because of this, or I'm so content, and there's a great word, somnolent, which is tied to I've fallen asleep, where I am, that, you know, I'll go to the same 6 places near my house, and that's about it. But that combination of big city feel, having one of the oldest, most high quality orchestras in America, having the oldest free series of Shakespeare in the United States, all these superlatives that we have right here, if you just give it the benefit of the doubt and go check it out. This community, I don't think of it as a sleeping giant. I'll be very frank with you, Katrina. It's a seductor. It'll seduce you. If you just are open to the notion that you can't shorthand any community. You can't shorthand Bettendorf. You can't shorthand Rock Island. If you take the time to meet some of these neighbors, to do some things, and that's what I'm saying, because it's also got the small town feel, you don't have to drive 2 hours to have an entirely different experience. I got friends in the suburbs who will do that all the time and not even think about it. I can go to an entirely different cosmos that is 8 minutes away from my front door. And it's yeah, if you give this community half a chance, it will win you over. But there are days, I got to be honest, when I'm kind of glad that that doesn't happen for everyone. I mean, it's a very refined taste, and there are some people who are better off in a cookie cutter suburb of a megalopolis, and that's great. That's where they should be. But we're a river town. We've got a little grit under our nails. It's who we are, and yeah, we attract, I think, the right kind of folks for that.
There's a lot to be proud of here, and there's a lot to, like, you know, buzzwords, I guess, that would ring a bell in people around the country, like, oh, John Deere headquarters, you know, Mississippi River. So there's a stat that's been floating around, and I have a paper here so that I don't mess it up, but it's 48% of our residents are willing to brag about the Quad Cities living here, the things that, you know, we produce and are all about. So there's another 52% that are not willing to do that, which, you know, at Visit Quad Cities, and I'm sure as board members, we view as a problem. I mean, maybe almost half our population is like A-okay with living here and encouraging people to be here, but the other half isn't. So, you know, what do we do about that? And is there even anything to do about it?
Well, this is one of the reasons, if I may, Ben, this is why I really appreciate folks who come here with a fresh pair of lenses. A lot of us grew up in a time when this community had to deal with the kind of crises that have killed other communities. You saw an entire industrial base evaporate almost overnight. And this is, of course, 40 years ago we're talking. And yet those that remained had the kind of grit to roll up their sleeves and get something done. On my best day, I think those 52%, they're happy to brag about the Quad Cities. They just don't want any more traffic. Who wants to wait more than 10 minutes to get anywhere in town?
Right.
But in a more realistic thing, I do think that it's the kind of conversations we have when we don't realize that where we are right now, and it does help us to travel in other communities. I get to travel a fair amount through my work. I can't think of another place that I would want to call home. Plenty of places I want to visit, but I cannot honestly think of another place on earth that I'd want to call home. And it's because of that history. And yeah, that history holds us back a little bit, but that's just some of the peppers in the chili.
Yeah, I think that statistic where we talk about the braggability of the community, I think there's a level of apathy in that within the community where, again, there's a certain amount of people that are willing to get engaged in the community and either provide service or even experience the community. And one of the, I guess, limitations of the Quad Cities is we are kind of spread out. Even though you can get to the opposite end of the community in 15 to 20 minutes, it's a bit of a distance. So people start to live in their microspheres, and it's a little bit easier to appreciate that if you're in one of the New York boroughs and your sphere has everything you want, then some. I mean, that's why most people there don't own a car. You don't need to because everything's within walking distance. We have every amenity within those same spheres. It's just our sphere is much larger. And with that surface area to have to cover, it took me 3 years before I found the children. I've got 3 small children. It took me 3 years before I found the Children's Museum in Bettendorf. And then once we discovered it, we had membership. We were there every weekend. So, I mean, there's a certain piece of that where it just takes, even for people who live here, a period of time to realize what's around you. And so I think that is what drags some of that number down. I think the more we can do as community advocates within our own community, not just outside bringing tourism in, but for residents here, the quality of life component of celebrating some of the great features we have in our community, I think that'll make a big difference and start to move that number over. But that's incumbent to board members, staff members, community leaders to start being advocates versus every opportunity to get, we're going to Chicago this weekend. It's great to be able to have proximity to a large urban area, but you have to be willing to experience what the Quad Cities has to offer, which is when it comes to arts and culture, it's just a community our size to have the arts and culture we have is just phenomenal.
Ben, how many years have you been here, you said?
I'm coming up on 5 years.
And
just over 4.5 years.
And you came like directly for the airport?
Yep. So I was recruited into the airport, and it's funny because when I came, I'd never heard of the Quad City. And I was very dismissive, was not interested till I got a brochure from the headhunter that was doing the executive recruitment. And I started to have there were some facts and figures in there that were actually provided through the CVB to this executive recruiter. And I started like, wow, that actually doesn't sound. And I had staff members that grew up in Freeport, Illinois, and Bettendorf, and they said, hey, you should consider it because we know you well enough that you may actually like that. We came and I brought my wife. We visited in April. Not the best time to visit the Quad Cities because it's the one difference coming from the evergreen state in the Northwest where it's green year round. Yeah. Whether it's mold or mildew or pine trees, it's green. Here, it's brown. The deciduous trees lose their leaves, so it doesn't feel quite as amazing as it does in spring and summer. I mean, when we get to spring and summer in the Quad Cities, again, the confluence of 2 major rivers, it's hard not to get excited to go outside.
Yeah, and Kai, you lived here since infancy. Yeah.
Well, yeah, the last glacier that rolled back, I came out of a schism between 2 rock formations. So it's been yeah. So, but I mean, that's why I say I do appreciate the perspectives of people who've been here for less amount of time. And I will say, I suffer from that same kind of complacency. Those of us who've made our whole lives here, and we really do understand the magic of the place, it's incumbent upon us to exhibit that core cultural trait of where we live, and that is hospitality. People always say we're the friendliest folks, when they come to visit from either of the coasts or a lot of other places. And we have to be very intentional about that and say, oh, you've got kids? Have I told you about the family museum? I wish I had met Ben sooner and I could have told him about that. That's a place my children and now my grandchildren have loved. And it's incumbent upon all of us to say, oh, you want Ethiopian? You want soul food? I mean, really good soul food? Or you want Thai? I mean, we know these places. We need to, and encourage our friends who've been here for a long time. You mean you haven't tried fill in the blank? I mean, we
Yeah.
got to do that a lot. We got to all be a lot better about that.
I think that's probably, I mean, I know that that is a huge role that Visit Quad Cities can play in just turning around that narrative and encouraging other community members. Like here, I'll plug our Certified Tourism Ambassador program, which both of you are a part of. And we, you know, we take really anyone, but, you know, frontline hospitality workers, frontline, you know, whoever you're going to see visitors wise, resident wise, just on a daily basis. It's a good program. You become certified in, you know, at least, you know, if you don't know everything about what the Quad Cities, there's a lot to know, but at least you know how to get that information for somebody, and you know how to approach somebody who's, you know, looking for something or has an issue or, you know, wants to vent. You learn how to appropriately handle those situations. And, you know, in doing that, we're kind of creating a small army of advocates for the Quad Cities. And I think, I can't speak to this personally, but I think a lot of community improvement has been made, I don't know, maybe in the last 15, 20 years, because people who have lived here longer than me say the 5 communities expanded out to the, you know, 52 or whatever communities that encompass our region. They used to act separately. Like, you know, the cities used to advocate just for themselves and say, hey, come to, you know, I'm just going to pick out, come to Davenport because we do all this stuff. And East Moline say, come to East Moline because this is what we've got. But now, you know, it seems as though there's been more of an embracing of we are all one destination. You know, we can work together and celebrate each other across the river, and not to get political, but it's an interesting place to live because, you know, if you look at like a political map, Illinois is blue and Iowa is red, and we're right here living together, celebrating each other. And, you know, yeah. So what's your guys' perspective on how 2 very different or 4 or 5 very different cities can collaborate, and what can we maybe do better to help celebrate other cities and other, you know, communities goings on?
Well, if I may, I would start by saying all of that is absolutely a strength, and we get that in higher ed. At Augustana, one of the things we sell prospective students on is this is an excellent demographic laboratory, no matter what part of the country you're from, because we really represent the broad averages of American demography in terms of economic diversity, political diversity, ethnic, racial diversity. Across this region, you're going to find a lot of that, just as I think it was once stated that Illinois, just from an economic demography point of view, broadly represents the United States as a whole. And the fact that we don't see things the same way, I mean, I'm going to turn it back to the beginning of the conversation. Mm-hmm. That's a key role for us as board members. Katrina, you and your colleagues, you are pros. You really get what you do, and I'm in awe of watching you do what you do. But you've only got the 2 eyes and the 24 hours of bandwidth. I don't know how you guys do all 24, but you do. And our job is to come and let you know about things that are in that landscape that may not be readily apparent. And it could be political, like you mentioned, and Ben mentioned. It could be other facets of the landscape. But everything you've described, that's part of why I said earlier, I can't imagine living someplace else. I have friends who live in places that are woefully homogenous, and it would bore me to tears. But I mean, I've been helped in seeing that by folks who've relocated here, like you and Ben.
Yeah, I would say that's part of the enchantment, right? It's the Quad Cities it's not just one thing for one group. There's a little bit of everything for everybody, and you mix that with the Midwest hospitality, and I think generally, as a community, as a group of communities, we all get along really well. Even though you go to different sides of the river, it's very red, very blue. I think the Quad Cities it's okay to disagree, you know, agree to disagree on certain things, but I think at the highest level of what really matters is we all agree that our community and home is what's important. And so I think that's where it comes together with organizations and nonprofits like Visit Quad Cities.
Have you guys had previous board experience, either, you know, in the QC or elsewhere before Visit Quad Cities?
Ben, you
I
want to
have.
start?
Yeah, no, I've had the opportunity to serve on several nonprofit boards. Not as much in the Quad Cities. I was involved with one other nonprofit in the Quad Cities, but outside the Quad Cities, I came from a suburb of Seattle called Puyallup, Washington, where I was on a planning commission representing downtown development area, which was a really fun, interesting, being close to the downtown proper portion of Puyallup and having that be a redevelopment district and representing small businesses and community interests. It was very similar to our role with Quad Cities, but the difference was there wasn't. It was a very clear. I mean, it was literally a 4-block area that you're concerned with businesses in that area, and that was it. The mission and role with Visit Quad Cities is so much wider. We talk about even our role and trying to explain to community leaders what we do as the CVB and what the chamber does as an economic development group, and how we have synergies that are inherent to the organization. But we all have a stake to claim in talent acquisition, destination development, and so there's a lot of importance around working together with other organizations that have similar missions or overlapping missions.
I would, well, first off, I don't even want to start to think of the different things I've had a chance to serve on, but I've gotten a chance to serve on higher ed bodies, healthcare boards for regional health systems, local entities, just a variety of things. But I think a common thread is that I get to work a lot in the nature of governance, how boards operate and how they work to best effect. And I would say what that's taught me is to appreciate the breadth of experience that is around the board table at Visit Quad Cities. Your earlier question, Katrina, called to mind one of my favorite quotes by an American writer named Walter Lippmann. He said, "Where all think alike, none thinks very much." So that is true for the beauty of the Quad Cities, but also this board that I sit on. I've been on boards where there's a kind of a groupthink, and woe unto you if you challenge that. And those are not healthy organizations. I think a sign of a healthy organization like this, it's not that there's conflict on the Visit Quad Cities board. I don't think I've ever really encountered that, but there is a marketplace of ideas, and we bring to that the best thinking we have. And I don't know. I tell my spouse that Visit Quad Cities is one of the most rewarding boards I've ever served on, because, and in part, it's the mission, right? It's to get other people to fall in love with the place that I fell in love with a long time ago, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's a great organization that I think, thanks to folks like Ben, and he mentioned Mo Hyder, our predecessor, Nancy Ballinger, another great previous board chair. It's got great governance and a great professional team too.
Is there a tradition when you hand off the chair spot? Do you guys do any kind of?
I can't tell Ben everything. It's some of it doesn't come until later. There's a little bit of hazing. It's illegal in some states, but he'll know when it's appropriate.
Yeah, not allowed to talk about it. It's like Fight Club. First rule of Fight Club is you can't talk about Fight Club.
Oh man, I don't want to breach any rules.
Yeah, they haven't told me about it yet.
But if there's like a secret handshake that you could let me in on or something.
At a totally serious level, Katrina, this organization understands succession very well. There have been times when, due to a variety of circumstances, board leadership, or sometimes by design, but sometimes by accident, that there is a disruption in board leadership. I think Dave and the governance committee understand that there's a continuum there, and I had modeled by Mo, my predecessor, try to be helpful, do not be intrusive. So I don't call up Ben and say, "What are you doing now?" But if Ben ever has a question, I hope he's got me on speed dial.
If you could put on rose-colored glasses and money is no object and all the things, what would you want for the Quad Cities future? This could be, an abstract thought or a physical amenity. Like, what would your ideal future be for our community?
Ooh. You know, and it's funny because we talk about this not regularly, but on occasion, of the importance of big thinkers within the community and big ideas. And, you know, like one of those big ideas we've been talking about a little bit is the Bison Bridge, the thought behind that, and something that could put Quad Cities in you know, our uniqueness on the map. And like hearing some of the thoughts around that, I mean, maybe it's not the next great big idea, but it's such a great big idea. And you think about, you know, if we could make something big, we would be something like the Bison Bridge that would be unique and pay homage to the history of the Quad Cities and become like a national park and a national, some kind of national highlight on the map of, hey, here's Quad Cities, USA, and it's a point of prominence. Not, and we have so many amazing historical components in U.S. history where you think back of things that have occurred in our history here with the Arsenal being right in the middle of our 4 cities, 52 cities. It's I think part of that manufacturing and agriculture history, I think, is part of something we can leverage. I almost want to say exploit, but I think leverage for some kind of great big idea that's going to put us as a major destination.
Well, Ben stole my best thought, and that first wave of the wand would be to help Chad Progracki make Bison Bridge a reality, you know, ASAP. But in a broader sense, I wish that the day will come, and I think it may, when everybody here feels at home, whether they just arrived from Senegal, whether they were driven from their home in Myanmar, they came for a job from Osceola, Iowa, or they've been here for a long time and are needing to transition to something different here in town. I want everybody to feel at home. And by that, I don't just mean that they like what I like. And I say, go to Genesius Guild or the Quad City Symphony, but that they feel so at home, they'll say, hey, Kai, come check out this from my family, my home, my culture. That would be my dream.
Over the summer, I went, or maybe it was in the spring, my year has been fast, but me and some coworkers attended Travel Iowa's yearly meeting out in Des Moines, and there was an exercise that was very, very cool. It was a piece of paper they handed out to everybody, and it was based on Hitsville, USA, Detroit, and their Motown really just, you know, how they took it by the horns and owned it. And so they said, what is your community's Blankville? So not Hitsville, but Blankville, you know, for the Quad Cities. And I thought about it and I thought, God, this is a great exercise, and I've got to be able to come up with something. And I couldn't come up with anything. I could come up with a million things, but I couldn't come up with just our one. I was like, oh, Quad City Pizzaville, or, you know, Live Musicville, or, you know, what have you, like, Bridgeville, whatever. I was coming up with a million things, but not one just stuck. And that just told me that, like, we are a lot of things here, and that's okay. We don't have to just be the one place for that one thing.
That's
Tractorville.
What's that, Ben?
Tractorville.
Why didn't I think of that?
I was going to go with Foodville because we take it so much for granted. But when we have folks visit or recently come to the college to start a career or something, say, I can't believe the breadth of food I can get here. I mean, and not just chains. If you want chains, we got your chains. But if you want to go to a family-run Vietnamese joint, if you want to go to a family-run sort of Creole Cajun down home plate, yeah, we got it. There's great food here. This is a great food town.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think that speaks to, like, I'm going to throw another stat at you guys, that 50% of visitors have a very good perception of the QC before they come here. And then that number grows to 70%, leave here, and then they have that very good perception. So that grows as people come here. And I think that's why, because even if you're not into live music or you're not into pizza, well, guess what? We've got museums, we've got an arts and culture scene, we've got beautiful outdoor spaces to explore. There is literally something for everyone here.
And that's very, that's a good way to look at it when you, it's kind of like the adage of you don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. So it's almost like we're leveraging the fact that the bar is being set low for us. Another way I look at it is a lot of what I do is expectation management. And one of the sayings I've used it for 20 plus years, and it's satisfaction is a function of expectation. And that's the importance, and I drive it home to some of my team members, the importance of setting expectations in a relationship early on, a business arrangement, or anything we do is here's the expectations we have. And again, it's that you want to avoid that under promise or over promise and under deliver. You don't want to do the opposite, but you also want to have that clear expectation. And so that, if somebody is expecting filet mignon and you get them just a T-bone, maybe it's not as good. But if they're expecting an old cheeseburger and they get a T-bone, they're pretty happy. It's the same outcome, but it's just that expectation early on can change perspective so much. So I think it's, part and parcel to what we do, advocating for the community and for the destination with Visit Quad Cities is working that expectation. We want to get people excited, but we also want to do it in a way that we can still deliver. We don't want to set it up and like, oh, wow, we just showed them the 5 coolest things we have. And it's, it's like showing a picture of here's the riverfront, one piece of riverfront from Schwiebert Park or something. And then they come in like that's the only part of the river that's accessible. And that's not what we do. We show one piece, but we have so many communities now, and it's something that's growing as an asset to where, you can see the river here. You can go across the river, see it there. You can get on the Channel Cat and go on the river to multiple locations and see it from that. So I think that's an important piece of what we do is also setting that expectation, but also managing those expectations for tourists.
Yeah, the things like the Channel Cat that we have here are kind of speaking back to like those big ideas. What would can you imagine before the Channel Cat existed, someone was like, hey, I have an idea. Let's load up passengers and travel them to and from across the Mississippi River. Like that probably seemed kind of wild at one point. And now it's just, that's an amenity that we know that we can expect and use daily.
Sure. As the resident old coot on this particular podcast, I remember before casino gaming came here.
Yeah.
Nobody thought that was, going to turn out with we thought it had potential, but it was such a huge game changer. And again, it was a very hard time here in the mid 80s. And we were losing a lot of great talent, and that's what started it. And it was creative thinking, and it really moved it forward.
I appreciate you guys so much for your perspective and for taking the time to chat all things Quad Cities and giving us a little insight on the board. We do appreciate everything you guys do and your guidance and leadership. And I think now is the time that I'm going to throw a question right at you, and I would like an immediate answer, whatever comes to your head. I'm going to have you fill in the blank. QC, that's where.
QC, that's where change is on the horizon.
I got to tell you, Katrina, my answer to that question depends on who's asking, because you always think about your demographic. But sure. I also, let's see, I'm going to try this one. QC, that's where Makatai Meshek Yak Ashewekwe and Nasa Askuk fell in love with this place, and you will too. That's Black Hawk and his family.
I love it, you guys. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And for those listening, you can find out what we're doing, what the board is up to, visit quadcities.com. You can meet the board. We've got we've got our names and titles on there. Meet the staff, contact us, anything you need. Also check out our events calendar, visit quadcities.com, and just click on that events tab. Everything updates daily, and we hope to see you there. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to QC, That's Where, a podcast powered by Visit Quad Cities. Text Visit QC to 38314 for insider events, activities, and updates sent straight to your phone. That's VISITQC, one word, to 38314. Message and data rates may apply.